Okay, welcome to Western Tradition Learning Center. I wanted to do some mythology, and I'm going to do a whole series of videos on mythology, but I just wanted to start with some of the short ones, and then we'll get to the longer ones, and I'll do some videos on the gods and goddesses and everything. So anyway, I'm going to read, this is from Edith Hamilton, who wrote a book called Mythology, which is very popular and has been a steady seller since she wrote it. She had a master's degree in classics. I believe it was classics. And she wrote other books called The Greek Way, The Roman Way. Excellent books. She was trying to bring, Greek and Roman culture to the average person. So she simplified the mythology down. And it's very good. This book is very good for high school students, even grammar school students, and even college students. And, of course, adults of all ages who want to enjoy mythology. Now, these are actually summaries of the myths, So they're not necessarily complete retellings, though they are retellings, but not complete. Anyway, let's enjoy them. Excuse me. Just going to clear my throat here. The story of Midas is told best by Ovid, from whom I have taken it. Ovid was a poet, a writer, who wrote some wonderful myths down. Pindar is my authority for Aesculapius, whose life he tells in full. These Danads are the subject of one of the plays of Aeschylus. Glaucus and Cilla, Pomona and Vertumnus, Erysichthon, all come from Ovid. So this is what this chapter is about. Now let's talk about Midas. Now we all know the story of Midas, or I would hope that you do. There's a lot of children's books about Midas, but let's read about him, right? Midas, whose name has become a synonym for a rich man, had very little profit from his riches. The experience of possessing them lasted for less than a day, and it threatened him with speedy death. He was an example of folly, being as fatal as sin. For he meant no harm, he merely did not use any intelligence. His story suggests that he had none to use. He was the king of Phrygia, the land of roses, and he had great rose gardens near his palace. Into them once strayed old Silenus, who, intoxicated as always, had wandered off from Bacchus's train, where he belonged, and lost his way. The fat old drunkard was found asleep in a bower of roses by some of the servants of the palace. They bound him with rosy garlands, set a flowering wreath on his head, woke him up, and bore him in this ridiculous guise to Midas as a great joke. Midas welcomed him and entertained him for 10 days. Then he led him to Bacchus, who, delighted to get him back, told Midas whatever wish he made would come true. Now, Bacchus was the god of wine. Without giving a thought to the inevitable result, Midas wished that whatever he touched would turn into gold. Of course, Bacchus, in granting the favor, foresaw what would happen at the next meal. But Midas saw nothing until the food he lifted to his lips became a lump of metal. Dismayed and very hungry and thirsty, he was forced to hurry off to the god and implore him to take his favor back. Bacchus told him to go wash in the source of the river Pactolus, and he would lose the fatal gift. He did so, and that was said to be the reason why gold was found in the sands of the river. Later on, Apollo changed Midas's ears into those of an ass, a donkey. But again, the punishment was for stupidity, not for any wrongdoing. He was chosen as one of the umpires in a musical contest between Apollo and Pan. The rustic god could play very pleasing tunes on his pipe of reed, but when Apollo struck his silver lyre, there was no sound on earth or in heaven that could equal the melody, except only the choir of the muses. Nevertheless, although the umpire, the mountain god Tumulus, gave the palm to Apollo, Midas, no more intelligent musically than in any other way, honestly preferred Pan. Of course, this was double stupidity on his part. Ordinary prudence would have reminded him that it was dangerous to side against Apollo with Pan. infinitely the less powerful, and so he got his ass's ears. Apollo said that he was merely giving to ears so dull and dense the proper shape. Midas hid them under a cap, especially made for that purpose. But the servant who cut his hair was obliged to see them. He swore a solemn oath never to tell. But the secrecy so weighed upon the man that he finally went and dug a hole in a field and spoke softly into it. King Midas has ass's ears. Then he felt relieved and filled the hole up. But in the spring, reeds grew up there, and when stirred by the wind, they whispered those buried words, and revealed to men not only the truth of what had happened to the poor, stupid king, but also that when gods are contestants, the only safe course is to side with the strongest. So Midas was a fool. He wanted the everything to everything he touched to turn to gold, and when he went out in the garden, all his roses turned to gold and that he touched, and his furniture turned to gold, and he was really happy until it was time to eat. And then there's even part of the myth where his daughter comes in and hugs him, and the daughter turns to gold. So anyway, he gets rid of the gift, thankfully, and then he pulls another stupid stunt where there's a music contest and he thinks Pan is better than Apollo, and Apollo turns his ears into donkey ears. So it's a pretty funny story, and Midas is a funny character. Okay, Aesculapius. This is a short one, another short one. There was a maiden in Thessaly named Coronis, a beauty so surpassing that Apollo loved her. But strangely enough, she did not care long for her divine lover. She preferred a mere mortal. She did not reflect that Apollo, the god of truth, who never deceived, could not himself be deceived. The Pythian lord of Delphi. He was a comrade he can trust, straightforward, never wandering astray. It is his mind which knows all things, which never touches falsehood, which no one or god or mortal can outwit. He sees whether the deed is done or only planned. Coronis was foolish indeed to hope that he would not learn of her faithlessness. It is said that the news was brought to him by his bird, the raven, then pure white, with beautiful snowy plumage, and that Apollo, in a fit of furious anger, and with the complete injustice the gods usually showed when they were angry, punished the faithful messenger by turning his feathers black. Of course, Coronis was killed. Some say that the god did it himself. Others say that he got Artemis to shoot one of her unerring arrows at her. In spite of his ruthlessness, he felt a pang of grief as he watched the maiden placed on the funeral pyre and the wild flames roar up. At least I will save my child, he said to himself. And just as Zeus had done when Semele perished, he snatched away the babe, which was very near birth. He took it to Chiron, the wise and kindly old centaur. This is not the ferryman. This is a centaur that's nice. Most of the centaurs are terrible. To bring up in his cave on Mount Pelion, and told him to call the child Aesculapius. Many notables had given Chiron their sons to rear, but of all his pupils, the child of dead Coronis was dearest to him. He was not like other lads, forever running about and bent on sports. He wanted most of all to learn whatever his foster father could teach him about the art of healing, and that was not a little. Chiron was learned in the use of herbs and gentle incantations and cooling potions, but his pupil surpassed him. He was able to give aid in all manner of maladies. Whoever came to him suffering, whether from wounded limbs or bodies, wasting away with disease, even those who were sick unto death, he delivered them from their torment. A gentle craftsman who drove pain away, soother of cruel pangs, a joy to men, bringing them golden health. He was a universal benefactor, and yet he drew down on himself the anger of the gods, and by the sin the gods never forgave. He thought thoughts too great for man. He was once given a large fee to raise one from the dead, and he did so. It is said by many that the man called back to life was Hippolytus, Theseus' son, who died so unjustly, and that he never again fell under the power of death, but lived in Italy, immortal forever, where he was called Virbius and worshipped as a god. However, the great physician who had delivered him from Hades had no such happy fate. Zeus would not allow a mortal to have the power over the dead, and he struck Aesculapius with his thunderbolt and slew him. Apollo, in great anger at his son's death, went to Etna, Mount Etna, where the Cyclops forged the thunderbolts and killed with his arrows. Some say the Cyclops themselves. Some say their sons. Zeus, greatly angered in his turn, condemned Apollo to serve King Midas as a slave for a period which is differently given as 1 to 9 years, or 9 years. It was this Admetus, whose wife, Alcestis, Hercules rescued from Hades. That's a whole big story in the Hercules section, which I could read later on. But Aesculapius, even though he had so displeased the king of gods and men, was honored on earth as no other mortal. For hundreds of years after his death, the sick and the maimed and the blind came for healing to his temples. There they would pray and sacrifice, and after that go to sleep. Then in their dreams the good physician would reveal to them how they could be cured. Snakes played some part in the cure, just what is not known, but they were held to be the sacred servants of Aesculapius. It is certain that thousands upon thousands of sick people through the centuries believed that he had freed them from their pain and restored them to health. Aesculapius is the god of healing, and his symbol is the double snake, which you see on a lot of medicine bottles and, sometimes on doctors' offices. You'll see that symbol. What's interesting is they mention here that people, after Aesculapius was killed by Zeus for, making people immortal, because he was so good with herbs and potions, and that people will go to these places called sleep temples. And this is true. They had one in Rome later on, and they had them in ancient Greece. And some of them were quite large. And you would go in there, and the priests would give you some herbal, potion to drink. It might put you to sleep. It might put you in an altered state. I don't know. But a lot of the times people would have these dreams, and they would see the god, and the god would say, "You're sick, do this." And a lot of times it would work. And we know because there were votive, like tiles. People would write thank you notes, which a lot of Christian shrines, people do that. They leave votive offerings or letters to the saint that help them, So it's kind of the same idea. So they would leave these notes, and we have them. So we know that people at least claim to be healed. Very, very interesting. Okay, now we'll read the Danads. The Danads. These maidens are famous, far more so than anyone reading their story would expect. They are often referred to by the poets, and they are among the most prominent sufferers in the hell of mythology, where they must forever try to carry water in leaking jars. Yet except for one of them, Hypermnestra, they did only what the Argonauts found the women of Lemnos had done. They killed their husbands. Nevertheless, the Lemnians are hardly ever mentioned, while everyone who knows even a little about mythology has heard of the Danads. There were 50 of them, all of them daughters of Danaus, one of Io's descendants, who dwelt by the Nile. Their 50 cousins, son of Danaids, brother Aegyptus, wanted to marry them, which for some unexplained reason they were absolutely opposed to doing. They fled with their father by ship to Argos, where they found sanctuary. The Argives voted unanimously to maintain the right of the suppliant. When the sons of Aegyptus arrived, ready to fight to gain their brides, the city repulsed them. They would allow no woman to be forced to marry against her will, they told the newcomers. Nor would they surrender any suppliant, no matter how feeble and no matter how powerful the pursuer. At this point, there is a break in the story. When it is resumed in the next chapter, so to speak, the maidens are being married to their cousins, and their father is presiding at their marriage feast. There is no explanation of how this came about. Sometimes older documents, pieces of them were missing, so that's what she means. But at once it is clear that it was not through any change of mind in either Danaus or his daughters, because at the feast he is represented as giving each girl a dagger. As the event shows, all of them had been told what to do and had agreed. After the marriage, in the dead of night, they killed their bridegrooms, everyone except Hypermnestra. She alone was moved by pity. She looked at the strong young man lying motionless in sleep beside her, and she could not strike with her dagger to change that glowing vigor into cold death. His promise to her father and her sisters was forgotten. She was, the Latin poet Horace says, splendidly false. She woke the youth, his name was Lynceus, told him all, and helped him to flee. Her father threw her into prison for her treachery to him. One story says that she and Lynceus came together again and lived at last in happiness, and that their son was Abas, the great-grandfather of Perseus. The other stories end with the fatal wedding night and her imprisonment. All of them, however, tell of the unending futility of the task the 49 Danads were compelled to pursue in the lower world as a punishment for murdering their husbands. So they were all punished for murdering their husbands. At the river's edge, they filled forever jars riddled with holes, so that the water poured away, and they must return to fill them again and again, see them drained dry. This is very typical of people in hell in Greek mythology, where they, Sisyphus is one, which I could always read him later, where they have to do an act over and over again, and it's completely, futile. So that was interesting. The Danads murdered their husbands. Not very nice. Not very nice. Now we have Glaucus and Cilla. I'm just going down a little bit. Okay. So, Glaucus and Scylla. Glaucus was a fisherman who was fishing one day from a green meadow which sloped down to the sea. He had spread his catch out on the grass and was counting the fish when he saw them all begin to stir and then, moving toward the water, slip into it and swim away. He was utterly amazed. Had a god done this, or was there some strange power in the grass? He picked a handful and ate it. At once an irresistible longing for the sea took possession of him. There was no denying it. He ran and leaped into the waves. The sea gods received him kindly and called on Ocean and Tethys to purge his mortal nature away and make him one of them. 100 rivers were summoned to pour their waters upon him. He lost consciousness in the rushing flood. When he recovered, he was a sea god, with hair green like the sea and a body ending in a fish's tail. To the dwellers in the water, a fine and familiar form, but strange and repellent to the dwellers on the earth. So he seemed to the lovely Scylla when she was bathing in a little bay and caught sight of him rising from the sea. She fled from him until she stood on a lofty promontory where she could safely watch him. Wondering at the half-man, half-fish, Glaucus called up to her, "Maiden, I am no monster. I am a god with power over the waters, and I love you." But Scylla turned from him, and hastening inland was lost to his sight. There she is, watching him. Glaucus was in despair, for he was madly in love, and he determined to go to Circe, the enchantress, and beg her for a love potion to melt Scylla's hard heart. But as he told her his tale of love and implored her help, Circe fell in love with him. She wooed him with her sweetest words and looks, but Glaucus would have none of her. "Trees will cover the sea bottom and seaweed the mountaintops before I cease to love Scylla," he told her. Circe was furiously angry, but with Scylla, not Glaucus. She prepared a vial of a very powerful poison, and going to the bay where Scylla bathed, she poured into it the baleful liquid. Not nice. As soon as Scylla entered the water, she was changed into a frightful monster. Out from her body grew serpents and fierce dogs' heads. Ugh. The beastly forms were part of her. She could not fly from them or push them away. She stood there rooted to a rock, in her unutterable misery, hating and destroying everything that came within her reach, a peril to all sailors who passed near her, as Jason and Odysseus and Aeneas found out. Scylla is a monster that was supposed to be almost like a hermit crab, but in like a mountainside, and it would when a boat came by, it would stick its heads out like a dragon head and attack. So we see here that Scylla was actually beautiful at one point. And Circe's nasty. She's in another myth. She's nasty. And she's related to Medea. That's her aunt. Medea was a witch. Nasty people. So anyway, poor Scylla. But, this happens all the time. Like the woman's in love with another person and she doesn't, the guy rejects her and then she hurts the other woman. So, which is interesting. Okay. All right. So we're going to finish this for you. So we got two more, all right? So, let me see if I can say this right. Erysichthon. Erysichthon. That's a tough one, boy. One woman had power given her to assume different shapes. Power as great as Proteus had. Proteus was a shapeshifter. She used it strangely enough to procure food for her starving father. Her story is the only one in which the good goddess Ceres appears cruel and vindictive. Erysichthon had the wicked audacity to cut down the tallest oak in a grove sacred to Ceres. Ceres is the god of cereal, the god of grain, otherwise known as Demeter. His servants shrank from the sacrilege when he ordered them to fell it, whereupon he seized an axe himself and attacked the mighty trunk around which the Dryads, these were tree nymphs, used to hold their dances. Blood flowed from the tree when he struck it, and a voice came from within, warning him that Ceres would surely punish his crime. But these marvels did not check his fury. He struck again and again until the great oak crashed to the ground. The Dryads hastened to Ceres to tell her what had happened, and the goddess, deeply offended, told them she would punish the criminal in a way never known before. She sent one of them in her car to the bleak region where famine dwells in order to order her to take possession of I can't say this name. Erysichthon. Bid her see to it, Ceres said, that no abundance shall ever satisfy him. He shall starve in the very act of devouring food. Famine obeyed the command. Famine is a goddess, by the way. She entered Erysichthon's room where he slept, and she wrapped her skinny arms around him, because Famine is skinny, holding him in her foul embrace. She filled him with herself and planted hunger within him. He woke with a raging desire for food and called for something to eat. But the more he ate, the more he wanted. Even as he crammed meat down his throat, he starved. He spent all his wealth on vast supplies of food, which never gave him a moment's satisfaction. At last he had nothing left except his daughter. He sold her too. On the seashore, where her owner's ship lay, he sold her as a slave. She prayed to Poseidon to save her from slavery, and the god heard her prayer. He changed her into a fisherman. Her master, who had been but a little behind her, saw on the long stretch of beach only the figure of a man busy with his fishing lines. He called to him, "Where has that girl gone who was here a moment ago? Here are her footprints," and they suddenly stopped. The supposed fisherman answered, "I swear by the god of the sea that no man except myself has come to this shore, and no woman either." When the other, completely bewildered, had gone off in his boat, the girl returned to her own shape. She went back to her father and delighted him by telling him what had happened. He saw an endless opportunity of making money by her. He sold her again and again. Each time Poseidon changed her, now into a mare, now into a bird, and so on. Each time she escaped from her owner and came back to her father. But at last, when the money she thus earned for him was not enough for his needs, he turned upon his own body and devoured it until he killed himself. That's crazy. That's a crazy story, but I love mythology. So, he was so hungry, he ate himself. Okay, figure that one out. That's crazy. Okay, the last one. Pomona and Vertumnus. These were two Roman divinities, not Greek. Pomona was the only nymph who did not love the wild woodland. She cared for fruits and orchards, and that was all she cared for. She's the goddess of orchards. Her delight was in pruning and grafting and everything that belongs to the gardener's art. She shut herself away from men alone with her beloved trees, and let no wooer come near her, meaning a man that wanted to marry her. Of all that sought her, Vertumnus was the most ardent, but he could make no headway. Often he was able to enter her presence in disguise. Now as a rude reaper bringing her a basket of barley ears, now as a clumsy herdsman or a vine pruner. At such times he had the joy of looking at her, but also the wretchedness of knowing she would never look at such a one as he seemed to be. At last, however, he made a better plan. He came to her disguised as a very old woman, so that it did not seem strange to Pomona when, after admiring her fruit, he said to her, "But you are far more beautiful," and kissed her. Still he kept on kissing her, as no old woman would have done, and Pomona was startled. Perceiving this, he let her go and sat down opposite an elm tree over which grew a vine loaded with purple grapes. He said softly, "How lovely they are together, and how different they would be apart. The tree useless, and the vine flat on the ground, unable to bear fruit. Are not you like such a vine? You turn from all who desire you. You will try to stand alone, and yet there is one, listen to an old woman, who loves you more than you know. You would do well not to reject Vertumnus. You are his first love, and will be his last, and he too cares for the orchard and the garden. He would work by your side." Then, speaking with great seriousness, he pointed out to her how Venus had showed many a time that she hated hard-hearted maidens, and he told her the sad story of Anaxarete, who had disdained her suitor Iphis, until in despair he hanged himself from her gate-post, whereupon Venus turned the heartless girl into a stone image. "Be warned," he begged, "and yield to your true lover." With this, he dropped his disguise and stood before her as a radiant youth. Pomona yielded to such beauty, joined to such eloquence, and henceforward her orchards had 2 gardeners. Well, so she gave in, and she got married. Okay, I hope you enjoyed those stories. These are short myths. They're fun. You know, Midas, the bonehead, and Aesculapius, I really like him. He's the healer. And the Danads are interesting. Glaucus and Cilla, very interesting. The guy that ate himself, it's crazy. And Pomona. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. Please, I'll see you next time. Have a great day.